Hello, and this is now our third talk with the Venerable um, Paññobhāsa. And this one's going to be a little bit different than the other two because this time we're really going to get into everything politically incorrect. And I'm looking forward to it.
Everything.
Everything. Well, as much as we can fit in 1 hour. And so, yeah, I figure we might just go right to it. Um, And I think the first one, which I always kind of find the most interesting, is just starting off with patriarchy. Seems to piss off the most people.
Patriarchy.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
my kind of take is, I mean, Buddhism and Hinduism, Christianity, if you look at it, they're all patriarchal. And
Yeah, Buddhism is definitely patriarchal.
yeah, and I have a hard time kind of explaining or justifying a lot of that, right? Because the kind of the go-to for almost everything patriarchy now, especially with our societies, it's all just sexism, and it's because, all these men want to keep their power and just own the women and, dominate. And I always found that kind of weird if you have like an enlightened person and all these enlightened teachers that you're worshiping and, doing it, they don't know anything and then it's purely that. So I don't know what your kind of take is as far as maybe how legitimate that is. And also if you could just give some evidence. I'm not as good with, I'm sure you have a lot more evidence that you can kind of use to back up some of the stuff on the Buddhist stuff than I do. So take it away.
With regard to patriarchy, you mean?
Yeah.
As like Theravada Buddhism as a patriarchal system.
Yeah. And then just patriarchy in general, I mean, kind of also your views, I'm also very curious about that.
Well, I'm not even exactly sure what the whole leftist concept of patriarchy is, other than just, the standard old feminist tropes of, men rigging the system in their favor in order to bully everybody else and remain in control and keep their privileges and all that. So, yeah, I can't really say what the lefties have in mind. I mean, a lot of them might not have anything in mind. They're just parroting what they're told. But with regard to patriarchy, definitely, like, a monk is called, a son of the Sakyan, the Sakyaputta, which would make the Buddha like the supreme patriarch of everybody, of all the monks. Anyway,
can we call him daddy then? Is that what you're saying? We can say
it might not be the most respectful way of addressing him.
Well, the Christians use father. I guess it can be a little bit something like that in English, maybe.
Yeah, our Father which art in heaven. But
Yeah.
even like the whole name of the religious system or the school of Buddhism is Theravada, and the Theras are essentially patriarchs. They're like the senior monks. So, and I mean, seriously, it's senior monks are like the leaders of Theravada Buddhism, except until you come to the West, where you've got lay people who, many of them might not keep 5 precepts and are calling themselves Sangha and trying to like admonish the monks and say, well, we need to change this and the scriptures need to be changed, or just we should just ignore these scriptures because they're sexist or whatever. And
what's the evidence, just from the Buddhist perspective, of some of the suttas or whatever that talks about this? Do you know it off the top of your head at all?
With regard to what?
Patriarchy? Like, I know there's a lot of ones as far as, like, I mean, even the one where I don't remember a name, or, the first woman that ever wanted to join the Sangha, right? And it was supposed to like decrease, how many years the Buddha, the true Dhamma would be around. And then there's also the rules with all the nuns and then serving the monks and all this stuff. I don't know. Do you know off the top of your head those?
Yeah. Well, there is the scene where the Buddha's own aunt, also his stepmother, because his father married 2 sisters, that she wanted to be the first nun, and the Buddha just kept saying, don't even go there, just don't say it. And so she's like following him around with like dust in her hair and like crying and standing outside of his door. And finally Ananda, who was also a member of the same Gautama clan, and also had a reputation for having a soft spot in his heart for women, that he talked the Buddha into it. He was using arguments like, women are just as able to become enlightened as men are, aren't they? And the Buddha admitted it. And so finally the Buddha said, okay, but now you've done it. But because of this, because of the ordination of nuns, the Buddha Sasana, Buddhism, will last only 500 years. It would have lasted 1,000 years, but it'll only last half as long now because of the ordination of nuns.
And that was apparently the only time the Buddha ever changed his mind. I remember reading as well, right?
There were a few other times when he would adjust rules.
Hmm.
There was one, um, it sticks out in my memory where he was allowing monks to take like butter and honey and ghee and sugar and uh, some other kind of oil, I think, as medicinal substances, but only in the morning. And then the monks were getting more sick from taking it right after they ate or something. So then the Buddha had to change the rules so that they were allowed to eat it in the afternoon also. So I mean, he would make adjustments when something turned out wrong. But that for me is it seems to indicate that maybe he wasn't as completely omniscient as people claim. If that really happened and he made a like a faulty call that actually made things worse, that had to be changed afterwards.
Yeah, that would seem weird. I mean, I think in like, the Hindu side, like the laws of Manu and all this stuff, when they talk about marriage, I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost very similar to the Christian stuff where it's like women are almost more like property and they're under the care of the man and supposed
Sure.
to, be obedient to the men, that whoever they marry and all this stuff. All that too is
Yeah.
also Buddhism, right?
Yeah, that's just built in. I mean, it was just built into the culture. So yeah, there's all these rules about women, like a married woman. It's sort of controversial interpretation, but it seems pretty obvious to me that a married woman, she has to be married for X number of years until she's completed her wifely duties and born at least one child and this sort of thing before she's allowed to renounce the world and become a nun.
Oh wow, I
And
never even. Where is that?
I'm pretty sure it's in the Bhikkhuni Patimokkha rules.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've studied that, and so my memory is hazy. And there's one weird interpretation. I think it's like a bhikkhuni can be ordained after 12 years if she's married or something like that. And so the commentary says that she just has to be 12 years old, which is just makes no sense.
Hmm.
Since if you're not married, you have to be 20. Like even a male, a monk, in order to be fully ordained, you have to be 20 years old from conception.
Hmm.
It'd be what, 19 years and 3 months or something like that.
So from like a Buddhist perspective, what kind of is the proper view of male female relationships then? Because I think that's really kind of what the patriarchy thing is getting at.
Um, I assume the standard, the standard, just the cultural setup would be the man is the boss, especially outside the house. Maybe the woman has some authority, especially like over the servants and that sort of thing, maybe over the children, but still it's like delegated authority that the husband allows her to have. And from the Buddhist point of view, it's like you should be compassionate. And like I already said, women are just as capable of enlightenment as men. On average, a woman has the same amount of wisdom as a man. So men and women are equally wise or equally foolish on average.
Mhm.
So there is that. But men are stronger, and it's just we just evolved that the men are the dominators.
So do you think it's purely all derived from physical strength? Do you believe like as far as there being like a psychological difference that would make men, you know, more inclined to be the ones in charge, or do you think it's just physical strength?
Men are more aggressive also, and women are tend to be have less self confidence, and they're also more amiable. They try to, um, they don't. I don't know how to say it, but it's a common one. Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot. How women are more agreeable than men, so they're more likely to compromise and try to get along and that sort of thing, whereas men are more likely to be hard asses that call the shots. And in the Stone Age especially, which is most of our existence as a species, um, yeah, probably the men just naturally, like with regard to chimpanzees and gorillas, our closest relatives, the males just naturally dominate. And one reason why they do that is just physically they're stronger, but also they're psychologically, emotionally just more aggressive and more likely to just take charge.
Yeah.
Although women can be bossy, but still.
I mean, the thing that kind of was interesting to me when you go to Asia, you know, there was a number of women, like, and especially more in Thailand, even in Myanmar, but it's definitely in Myanmar too, where they were so discouraged spiritually. There was like only the monks and then maybe kind of the men, but the women's like role was to completely serve. And I feel like it was really toxic to the women spiritually, even though I still really strongly believe that like having the man is like my kind of theory, I guess, on a personal level is more that, you know, women want this ultimate father figure that protects them and plays the role of kind of more the logical side, staying calm. I think stoicism is closer to masculinity than
Hmm.
anything else. And then on the feminine side, you would have more someone interested in the worldly stuff, even like a lot of the money, looks, all this stuff being more the characteristics of women, which is why I think it's slightly more difficult for women. But nonetheless, if a woman is, you know, taught correctly, um, you know, you can have this great union, and women can, you know, seem to have like a definitely more intuitive ability. Men can be a bit dense in a way, and maybe that's the weakness there. What's your take on that?
Well, there were reasons why nuns were discriminated against, even in ancient times when they were fully ordained bhikkhunis. Partly is just the whole trouble of monks and nuns interacting, where you got men and women interacting. That's just bound to cause trouble sometimes. So, um, also, really, what one of the purposes of being a celibate renunciant is to be liminal, where you're breaking down these dichotomies, these pairs of opposites that are what hold samsara in place. Really, it just kind of reinforces samsara or something. So if you don't have the male female polarity, then the monks, they've just eliminated that dichotomy essentially, just by being celibate and alone and not comparing themselves with some other type of person. That it eliminates the pairs of opposites that are always rubbing up against each other, which is what samsara is made of essentially. So
Well,
there's that, but also, like, they made it harder for women to ordain, partly because, just like a lot of cases nowadays where a woman might not even meet the man that she marries until her wedding day. It's just an arranged marriage from the time that they're infants sometimes. And she might just get stuck with a horrible marriage. And so she might just ordain as a nun as a way of just getting away from a bad domestic situation. So
mhm.
they made it a lot harder for women to ordain, partly because of that. And then they made rules. Um, some rules are for women's own protection, like it was against the rules for bhikkhunis to live in forests or for them to travel alone, that sort of thing, just because it's more dangerous for
Yeah,
women.
they're always under the protection of a monastery, correct? That's the idea, because otherwise they could be taken advantage of, and they need the protection of the men.
Well, they're in a way they're under the protection of a village or a town, because they're really not allowed to live out in the forest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they'd be under the protection of like the sheriff and that sort of thing. You've got civilization protecting them,
Hmm.
um, in away from the forest.
Because it's always kind of killed me, like in, you know, or especially in Western society, that I think the dynamics between men and women have been so misunderstood and destroyed, where all patriarchy basically means like abuse of power versus seen as like, you know, I don't know, something that's more organic or part of
Yeah,
nature. And that if it's not so much that women are incapable, but that having women play what I would say would be women's roles and men's playing men's roles allows for women to be more comfortable and for men to be more comfortable. And then, you know, even within that, you have, you know, certain overlap, and that's also okay. It's not like a enforced thing, but like female happiness has definitely gone, you know, plummeted. Uh,
yeah, definitely.
and so I think a big part of that is just not understanding this ancient wisdom about male female dynamics. But it's um it's really hard because the culture is so far. Like, I mean, like I kind of brought up before, I'm just curious though about what would you say like to a lot of the women, right? I mean, even in Myanmar, Thailand, all these places that were even Buddhist, you know, and how, you know, that are maybe discouraged by the suttas.
Well, the suttas don't say much against them really, but the culture is. Yeah, in a way, they are second-class citizens to some degree. Like in Asia, throughout most of Asia, perhaps, it's just assumed that women are inferior to men in some way or another. So there is that. So that's like a handicap. Although nobody's really stopping women from, reading the text and meditating and following Dhamma as well as they can. And they could start a new order. I mean, it wouldn't be an official order of bhikkhunis, but I mean, you could start some like lay sisters or something like that, where they could follow whatever rules they thought were appropriate and that sort of thing. Maybe in Asia, where people are more conservative with regard to that sort of thing, it might not be so easy, but there's really nothing in Buddhism itself that would prevent that, just so long as they're not calling themselves fully ordained bhikkhunis if they're not fully ordained bhikkhunis. But it would be better if they weren't fully ordained bhikkhunis, because then they don't have all these extra rules based on ancient India that are essentially discriminatory against women, just to make it harder for them to ordain, to weed out the ones that are just trying to get away from a bad husband or that sort of thing.
Because you would see that as not being necessary in the West. Is that the idea?
What not being necessary?
The becoming a nun in order to get out of a bad marriage, right? Because you guys would have divorce laws. Is that the idea?
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, but yeah, ask again.
Because just like you were saying, it's like the ancient rules, basically. Some of them are basically obsolete, and he was talking about the one with women leaving, because
yeah, that wouldn't really
saying, like, it's not necessary because of the divorce laws then.
Yeah, that wouldn't be necessary, because women really aren't owned by a male. Like in India, like when a girl is young, she's pretty much owned by her father, and then he hands her off to her husband, and so she's like owned by her husband. And then if she lives longer than her husband does and doesn't throw herself into the funeral pyre, then she's essentially owned by one of her sons, her adult sons, or that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's obsolete in the West now, obviously. But I think it would be better just to set up a new kind of quasi order of monks and nuns, really, especially in the West, where you're not like having to strictly follow or just break rules that were designed for ancient India and don't fit the culture very well.
Almost.
I mean, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be monks too, but still, it's like fully ordained Theravadan monks in the West are almost certainly always going to be just a fringe phenomenon, just because it can't go mainstream, because the mainstream is so radically different.
But you think that a different version of that was maybe more homegrown in a sense would work?
Yeah, I think it would. It would definitely strike more traction.
But then still following the Theravada. Well, I mean, I guess I don't know. Like, I guess you'd have to kind of weigh things. I mean, even now, people are kind of already accusing me of, trying to start my own religion, monoism or something. Because it's like I already have my own beliefs, and it's a mix of a whole bunch of things. And
yeah,
I'm pretty unapologetic about it. I really believe that, you try things on, you experience. I follow my intuition. I want other people to follow their intuition. My, practice is mostly based in Theravada, so I feel closest to the Buddha. Also, too, there's a lot of stuff in Buddhism that I still feel like, is strong enough that I can claim to be a Buddhist. But like, I think even like we're kind of going over before, there's a couple of things I believe that would definitely be 100% blasphemy in the Theravada community. But
yeah, same with me.
Yeah, and same with you. So it's like, to start something, I always think, like, is it going to be then that new thing? Would it be a multi-religious kind of thing? Like, as Buddhism is the core, where, you also don't want, obviously, everyone to just have their own interpretations and everyone's claiming this and claiming that. So I also kind of always ran into this thing where it is a little bit difficult. Like, even now I've been thinking about, kind of claiming more to be a theosophical Theravada Buddhist, because they had the whole thing about the different energy bodies and, about how the subtle realms work. And I find that to be a lot truer than kind of what the Theravada says about that. But they also converted to Theravada, even though it was kind of like, I mean, that's why Buddhism in the West spread, was because Blavatsky and Olcott and one other guy, Leadbeater, all went to Sri Lanka. and basically, worked with the Sri Lankan government and the British in order to make Sri Lanka Buddhist. And so, they also converted to Theravada Buddhism because they liked, I think, the practices. It's almost like the same thing, you know. So I'm just always kind of curious, from your view, if there is going to be something new created, how do we really decide what should or shouldn't be adhered to, or do we not need that, as everyone thinks for themselves, type of thing?
Well, if you're going to espouse or profess Theravada Buddhism, then you'd have to follow the suttas, or if you're not going to follow the suttas, you should have a very clear and good reason not to follow the suttas.
Mm-hmm.
But following Vinaya, I mean, that would only be for ordained monastics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in the West, it's almost like the tradition not to have a tradition. Like Ram Dass, who was one of my first teachers, he was mostly a Hindu because his guru was a Hindu, but still he's talking about Buddhism and throwing in a little Christianity sometimes, or a little Sufism or that sort of thing. And, a lot of the teachers in the West are eclectic. They're not really adhering strictly to any particular tradition. Maybe they're like someone like Eckhart Tolle, who had some sort of intuitive awakening, some mystical experience or something. And so he's running mainly on that and just picking metaphors and analogies and that sort of thing from the various religious traditions as a way of explaining what he supposedly knows from his own personal experience. It's just that it's been explained in more famous, more well-known ways that people might be able to grasp more easily if you use Buddhist terminology or that sort of thing. So some of them are like that. A lot of like the main spiritual teachers in the West tend to be that sort, where they're not really even trying to adhere to one system at all, like Krishnamurti or somebody like that, where they're either just going with their own ideas and trying to put that into words in whatever way works, or else they're sort of cobbling together different ideas from different spiritual systems that just happen to work.
I have a friend, and she's basically doing the van life thing and wanted to start kind of the first mobile Buddhist Sangha, which I thought was actually pretty cool. I mean, kind of having just that minimalist, because you're just in the van.
Yeah, Dharma bums. Dharma bums.
Dharma bums, yeah. But this would be like van bums, because I think it's a step up from just walking around with a pack over your shoulder.
Oh yeah, or riding freight trains.
Yeah, and then you also are like, like in this case, you kind of have either your RV or some sort of trailer or something, and you go around and do your Buddhist stuff and have events. And I thought it was a pretty cool idea, actually. I could see that something like that working. But the only problem still is, I think it's a pretty big investment, and you kind of have to have some way to still make money. Because I just don't think even the alms stuff, I mean, it kind of works really just because of the religious community. I don't ever see, just begging for food or money to ever really work in the West from a spiritual perspective.
It can work, except it takes just you really have to have a lot of faith in just flinging yourself into the unknown, and God will provide, that sort of thing. I mean, it really can work. There are people who have done it. There's the old lady who was what was it, Peace Pilgrim or something like that, where she didn't handle money. Yeah, she didn't handle money, I'm pretty sure, and just walked.
And like at 60 too, she was like old, and then she just walked like coast to coast by herself, and she just had like a little bit of like rice. I mean, not rice. She had a little bit of milk powder, a couple things, and it's just like unbelievable, that woman.
Yeah. So I mean, it can be done, but you really have to be a heavy hitter even to take it on. So that would weed out most of the people who have good intentions and have some spiritual inclination, but they're not already a heavy hitter.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I mean, it can be done. It has been done.
For me, it was kind of like the startup money too for a lot of that stuff. But I think, I'm still kind of throwing it back and forth. Like I definitely see it being an option. And, I think there does need to be something, because like I said, I really do believe that, and this is going to lead into the next question, that, Buddhism in academia and a lot of the mainstream Buddhism in the West is just heavily corrupt. And I was wondering if maybe you could just give some examples of that you know of.
Of academia, you mean?
Of just of the Buddhism in general in the West being corrupt. Like what's the thing you would kind of point to?
Well, almost every Dharma hall now they're talking more about, white privilege and global warming and gay rights than they're talking about the Buddha. I mean, that's just a common phenomenon that really took off just relatively few years ago. So it's like cultural Marxism, just like religion flavored cultural Marxism. It's like Marxism is notoriously anti-religion. So instead of just abolishing religion, it's essentially taking them over and converting them over into a form of pseudo or quasi-religious Marxism.
And what about those that don't understand why that would be Marxism? They're just kind of like, oh, well, we're just helping. We want to help gay people. We want to help black people. What, I mean, is there anything that just to kind of point to be like, this is not what's going on here that, I don't know.
Well, there were Marxists in the early 20th century, like Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, who realized that the West was too prosperous for there ever to be the glorious proletarian workers' revolution. So they had to come up with some new way to overthrow Western capitalism. And so they got rid of or largely got rid of the class, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. They're just trying to overthrow the entire system so that it can be replaced with something more socialistic. And so they've just fragmenting, dividing up everybody against everybody else. And they're endorsing anything that would weaken society, like they're attacking the family, they're putting race against race and endorsing, in a way, it's sort of like the Roman Empire, where with regard to the neighboring countries, they'd always take the side of the weakest side. If there were like two neighboring countries at war with each other, Rome would always endorse the weakest side just to keep everybody weak. And that's essentially what cultural Marxism is doing, even though most of the people who follow it are just sheeple who are following whatever is in fashion, whatever they're told to believe. But that's basically the gist of it.
I mean, I get why for some people it'll be so hard to distinguish between, like just helping and like, okay, well, I believe there's, too much violence and therefore I want to help reduce violence, and having some sort of movement versus this dividing governmental thing. Because I just don't feel like a lot of them, when I talk to people who maybe don't understand how this is polarizing and it is Marxist at its core, and it's all this anti-government, and it is, pitting groups against each other. I just, I never know, like, is there anything you can think of to point to show, okay, it is polarizing. It's not like you're helping, I guess, like, and it's because the media is so much on their side. I feel like a lot of times when I mention anything like this, right, there's going to be like a media company that's poured millions of dollars and try to making this point and look at this data and that data, even though it's, if you dig deeper to any one point, usually it's, they just point to inequality. If there's inequality, therefore there must be something wrong. And,
well, that's like a fundamental myth that it's all based on. It's going back to the patriarchy thing, where it's like one of the first things that Marxists did, partly because Marx was pre-Darwinian, is they just dispensed with human nature. They just assume that people are essentially equal with regard to their potentials and their innate talents and all that sort of thing. They're just like a blank slate. And so just based on the denial of human nature, which itself is just absurd. There obviously is human nature, but the left, partly because of the Marxism thing, just completely dismiss that and say any inequality can't be because some groups of people are better at certain things, because that would be racist. It's like you can't even go there. They'll just shut that down. You'll just get banned. So I mean, they just take it as an axiom that any inequality of outcome has to be due to evil whitey oppressing people, even though white people aren't even at the top in America anymore.
Yeah. Makes it definitely.
But I mean, if you're talking to Buddhists, then you can say, just because you're helping women doesn't mean you should be against men. Or if you're trying to help, brown colored people, doesn't mean you have to be against white colored people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess from their perspective, they're just trying to balance it. And then, they view as these people are trying to hold onto their power, right? Everything is like the white people. The reason why you would be against anything they would say is because you are trying to maintain your power and don't recognize how much privilege you have. I mean, I've recently been told 1,000 times, you know, that I'm so privileged, therefore I have no right to speak on anything. You know, and it's like, it's so unbelievable to me that people can really get to that point and believe that.
Yeah, well, it's essentially degenerated into a cult at this point. So it's like trying to talk sense to, you know, a fundamentalist Christian or like a Jehovah's Witness, something like that. I mean,
it's a complete denial of philosophy and logic, that there would be such a thing as philosophy. Like there could just be reason regardless of your skin color or whatever. Like there just be truths about these things, and we can just discuss ideas, and these ideas don't have to be always overshadowed by some sort of identity. You know, we could just talk about, hey, do we think this is true? Why do we think it's true? And that's not like a black or a white thing, or a, you know, poor or rich thing. There's just, you know.
Yeah, they even got it worked out so that if you're colorblind, that's racist. Or to say all lives matter is racist.
Yeah. And I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, right? I mean, like even the reason why I would say I'm conservative is because, you know, I believe that a lot of this stuff is all more about going inside, and it shouldn't be dealt with the government. The more powerful the government gets, I think closer you get to communism, Marxism, and all this, you know, it eventually, I think, just leads to some sort of weird dictatorship or some sort of, you know, elitism, where you have just these elites that are stronger, which is, you know, I do believe that there is sort of like a, how to say that, you know, say income inequality, or the fact that the rich are getting richer. The problem is we can't agree on the solution to that, right? It seems to be like, okay, we'll just tax the rich more and more. But the rich, I think, pretty much love to be taxed, because it almost legitimizes all their fields where no one else can get into it, but they can, you know, and then,
Yeah.
um, and then also too, to pay for all these programs that it's always trying to balance everything out. You get everyone taxed, and so, you know, the middle class gets destroyed because of the tax. The poor can't afford it, and then if you tax the rich, it just allows them to go in their group where they have all the power, because no one can ever get there except for them. And
plus, they can afford the slick accountants and lawyers and everything to get them all the loopholes, so that they wind up not paying taxes at all.
yeah, it's really true. And I think that the idea that you can just, you know, I don't know, like pass a law and then that'll fix that, it just doesn't exist. And you know, the
Yeah.
more, and it takes the power away from the people, because I'd really love to see even like local spiritual communities, local churches, local whatever, you know, have more and more money from the people that live there. But if the people that live there don't have any money, because it's all going to the federal government, which can't discern which communities, like, it's everything is just very broad always. You know, I want the states to have more power and the local communities to have the most power, so they can make the best decisions for the people in that area, because, you know, it's they'll know what's going on, you know. But yeah, I mean, from a Buddhist perspective, especially with the karma and going inside and dealing with your issues, it's like this thing of like helping by going outside instead of like changing yourself and then changing the people around you, is
Yeah.
really the key spiritual thing that I feel like is missing in the whole conversation.
Oh, there's a lot of things missing in modern Western leftist Buddhism. That's one of them. Is that we're responsible. It's our own karma that determines whether we are going to be successful or whether we are going to fail. And so, yeah, you have to improve yourself if you want to improve your condition, not just blame somebody else. And also, there's in Christianity also, although Christianity is despised by the left now also, where if two people are speaking, then both have a moral duty. The person who's actually speaking has the moral duty not to deliberately be hurtful or untruthful, but the other person who's listening has the moral duty, even if the other person is being deliberately hurtful or untruthful, that the person who's listening has the moral duty not to be offended and to forgive the other person, which and that's just completely gone.
Mm.
Even left-wing Western Buddhists, they just lost that. That's just not even in the equation anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the thing too that seems really strange to me is like I'm perfectly happy with people kind of believing what they want to a pretty high extent. It's just when you start shutting people down, you start trying to control. It's like these people want to control everybody else, and that's why everything's a political issue now, when it wasn't before. It's because they always want to enforce their will on the whole, because they believe, you know, that these people are racist or whatever it is. Versus,
Yeah, well, there are reasons for that. I mean, with regard to communism, which is, far left, that's the direction the left is going, is farther and farther left. And in communism, you no longer have individualism. You just have like an insect-like group mind. So everybody has to believe the same narrative. And also, I assume that a lot of people on the left even, the leftist narrative is so absurd at this point that deep down they've got their own doubts, and it's just people who are outspokenly not following along and poking at it and saying this isn't true. It makes them feel insecure and resentful, and so they want to just shut down people because, you know, they want to live in their bubble, and it kind of, they have like this subconscious feeling that what they've been told to believe and what they are obediently believing actually is bullshit, but they can't let it come up to the surface, because then of course, you know, they're living a bullshit life, and they have a bullshit belief system, and they can't face that. So they just have to shut up anybody who's trying to talk sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's some of that too.
And so just for the record too, just to clear things up, because obviously with you know, Brian being the Buddhist Nazi and everything else, on your own views, right? I don't think, from my understanding, you're neither Nazi nor fascist or any sort of thing like that, correct?
No, I think the best political system that I'm aware of would have been the ones that the founding fathers set up in America, probably without the slavery, but yeah, they set up a good governmental system, and both communism and fascism are authoritarian, which I don't like. So if I had to stick a political label on myself, I'd probably be like classical liberal.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to choose between Marxism and fascism, so long as the fascism wasn't just overtly violent and militaristic and just, you know, going out and slaying and conquering just because they feel like it, then yeah, I'd have to go with the fascists. If I had to choose between Marxism and fascism, I would consider fascism to be the lesser of two evils.
Okay, I get that. Why liberal, not conservative? I'm just curious, or traditional. Like, I mean, they're pretty similar, but I'm just curious as to why you would say like, you know, what is it called? Traditional liberal or?
Well, if I was a traditional conservative, then I'd probably have to go with Christianity. You know, I'd be like a normie in that sense. And yeah, I just have never had much use for that. That's one reason why I was never a conservative when I was younger. Is I do like freedom of thought. I like to be a free thinker and come up with my own ideas and believe what I consider to be true, not just believe what I'm told.
Hmm. Well, for me, I felt like the liberalism was kind of the ramp that was geared up for all the stuff we're going
Yeah,
into
well,
now.
liberalism, I mean, um, I've read that the closest thing you've got to classical liberalism in the world with regard to a major political party would be the Republican Party of the United States. What's called liberal in America now is beyond liberal. They're not even liberal anymore. But liberalism originally had the idea of, you know, freedom of thought and you know, individualism and that sort of thing, whereas the left is now getting into collectivism, and they really don't like individualism, because then you're capable of critical thought still.
Yeah, I guess for me, conservatism, like the main principles are basically that the government should basically just deal with the military, maybe mail or something else like that. Um, and then you know, have as small government as you can with there being a moral basis, that there should be some sort of moral code. And I know that be coming from Christianity, but I really do think the society, in order to be stable, has to have some set of morals that are kind of agreed on by the people, and that there can be kind of freedom of thought and other stuff, but that it should be taught, like everyone kind of understands, you know, not to kill, steal, as far as even like the transgender thing or whatever, like all this stuff, even in schools, it kind of gets a little bit blurry, or how to treat children would be kind of a moral issue, you know, like keeping them from stuff that might be too violent when they're young. All these I kind of find to be moral issues that in conservatism would be thought of as being good in the government. Well, on the liberal side, I think it's a little bit more open in that regard. I don't know what do you think about that?
Actually, I think liberalism would be come closer to what you're talking about than like standard Western conservatism. Whereas liberalism. It's like classical liberalism and libertarianism are almost the same thing. So what's called liberalism now in America is very different from what classical liberalism, like John Stuart Mill was teaching. So classical liberalism comes close to like right-wing libertarianism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess for myself, it all kind of seems to merge together quite a bit. It just seemed like, especially with spending and all this type of stuff, because we're quite in a hole now. The conservative side. I mean, because even now with society, the way that it's gotten, I got to kind of look back and say, okay, well, there has to be maybe something off, unless there's just a lifespan of democracy, which is also possible. Was it Socrates who talked about that, or can't remember which philosopher, but that maybe it's just like 300 years plus, give or take, is democracy falls apart because people always want the candy man and never want the doctor. In a sense, it's
well, I think it was Thomas Jefferson said that a democracy dies as soon as the people realize that they can vote for free stuff.
Yeah.
Once you got people like essentially like riffraff, or just the mob, the masses, once they realize that they can democratically vote just to get free stuff and stick it to the rich, then that's pretty much the end of it. Then you're going to have to take it over with, or you're just going to have to replace that with something authoritarian, maybe some kind of oligarchy or something.
Yeah, the other thing with conservatism I always liked was the self-reliance thing, even like in the say going with the van life or what it might be. But I mean, there's such loaded terms, I mean, I don't consider the Conservative Party to be the Republican Party to be almost any better than the Democratic Party. I think they're almost like maybe just a couple points apart, kind of in my view, with all the, bribing and everything else. It's just,
well, it's like a lot of just about everybody at the top has essentially sold their souls to the globalist new world order. They're committed to working towards this world, like corporate world government or some such. So yeah, it does seem that a lot of, it's called the swamp, like what Trump was talking about, drain the swamp, and the swamp got rid of him quickly.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, I was really interesting something Jordan Peterson said, where it's like the left kind of continues to aggravate things. It kind of makes this polarization like worse and worse. And that generally with speakings is like the right side picks up all the guns, and eventually you have some sort of form of a dictatorship once it gets really bad. And it's like inevitable. And that's like the cycle.
Yeah, well, it may be necessary. So we should be hoping for a good kind of dictatorship and not a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it was Jonathan Glubb wrote the essay on the fate of empires, where he was saying that just about every powerful, prosperous, like a world power, has a lifespan of maybe 250 years. And one reason why Rome lasted longer than that is it had a reset. They had the Republican system was breaking down. It was just degenerating into one civil war after another, and the army was realizing that they could just have their general become the next leader of the country thing. And so that kind of got reset with Augustus Caesar, first Julius Caesar, and you had like a more structured, and for a long time it was a more peaceful and prosperous system. At least peaceful and prosperous inside the borders, maybe not for the barbarians living right outside the borders.
Yeah, I mean, I get pretty pessimistic living here in LA because it's kind of the belly of the beast. I really hope people, at least the majority that, most of my friends, we're all kind of, actually, I would say I have a pretty mixed group of friends now I think about it, but I hope the rest of the country seems a little bit more balanced than a lot of the people here, because there's just, everything seems to reinforce itself. It seems like, one thing I realized, even with like making spiritual progress, it takes such a huge amount of humility to change anything, because a lot of times these little tweaks kind of compound, like even being kind of like, say, more, feminist leaning when you're younger, and then all of a sudden, okay, well, you just have your career, and then you start, you have to kind of double down on not having anything else, and you get resentful. Maybe your relationships aren't working as much because you're focusing so much on work, and you're kind of valuing that and everything else. And it just kind of builds over time. And you just see this, like, where people from something which maybe was very innocent, when they were young, can grow into something that just consumes their whole life, and it takes humility to change any of that.
Yeah, once you've been like professing something for years and years, then yeah, it's like if you're proven wrong, it's going to be like a kind of death. You're going to feel really awful, like somebody like Pa Auk Seato in Burma, that after all the years of professing this system as the one true interpretation of Buddhism, if somebody somehow, some master of debate, were able to explain very clearly to him that what he's teaching really isn't as legitimate as he was insisting that it was, then yeah, I mean, that would just be like a part of him would be dying. People identify with their ego and their beliefs. It's like your belief system is part of who you are. So if any of your beliefs are proven wrong, that's like a part of you dies. And people just have this instinctive aversion for death. And also there's like an instinctive clinging to whatever gets us through life, even if we're not happy, so long as it works well enough to keep us alive and functioning, then we just cling to that. And it takes some kind of real crisis and breakdown where our habitual way of dealing with life just doesn't work anymore, that we're able to make a major change. And that's like how Chinese brainwashing used to work. That's how like interrogation methods work a lot. That's how like military basic training works, where you just break the person down until they're just like a mass of jelly, and then you can build them back up into what you want them to be. And even some meditation retreats tend to be that way, where you're just under this extreme stress of just moving in slow motion and just like watching your breath or your muscle movements or whatever all day long. And it's so unnatural that a lot of people just break down. And yeah, it can cause major changes for the better or for the worse, depending on what your situation is.
Yeah, I mean, that's that, but that does also kind of semi seem in line with a lot of the teachings, where it's basically like go out in the forest or go and meditate for long hours is kind of basically almost like what the old, suttas, basically all they talk about is just basically find a place, meditate some more, and then get to these jhanas, and
yeah. And what you're doing by getting the jhanas is just eliminating beliefs, because when you're in a deep jhana state, you're not thinking or believing anything. So that would be much closer to the blank slate than what the lefties are saying we're born like. Like a baby is just laden with all these animal instincts and everything that are still there in potential.
Yeah, for sure. One of the questions we had from one of our fans was just in regard with everything being, especially in Buddhists in the West, we kind of touched on this already, but being so leftist a lot of the times, what can people do if they want to study the other side? Do you, like, even for resources for you, I guess, I mean, with books or different places that you kind of believe that are legitimate, are there any places in your mind that are kind of really good for that are free of, I guess I could say, a lot of the leftist influence in America?
The best, like a meditation center that I know of in America, I don't know of very many, but the best one I know of is in San Jose, which is the Tathagata Meditation Center, which is run by a Vietnamese group that follows the Burmese Mahasi tradition. And it's very similar to what a meditation center in Asia would be like. So it's got almost no lefty political correctness going on there. And so maybe a place run by serious, semi-westernized, relatively westernized Asians, maybe someplace like that. Or, I mean, you just have to search around trying to find like a Western teacher that hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid yet, or like monks are relatively conservative, even though they might have to talk the talk in order to keep people from freaking out, because most of the Westerners who go to listen to that sort of thing are probably politically correct and all that.
Well, at least
but really, I mean, if you want to know Buddhism, the first thing you do is you just go directly to the original texts. Forget the Jack Kornfield books and all that kind of stuff. You just go to the Pali text, get good translations. Like Bhikkhu Bodhi, even though he's extremely leftist, as far as I can tell, his translations are accurate and good. So if you can avoid the end notes, just read the text, then that would be your best bet. I mean, what I did, I was just went alone like the horn of the rhinoceros. I was never really into group Buddhism before I became a monk. And that's kind of one difference that I've got from a lot of the people that contact me, because a lot of the people that contact me are, asking, how can we set up like a Buddhist community? And I'm not against that at all, and I'd be happy to participate in that if it worked out that way. Although I really never did that. I just I read the books and studied it, and even in the books it just says go alone. It's like you're on your own, make an island of yourself. It's like you have to do it yourself. And I mean, it helps to have a teacher, but if you can't find a teacher, there's still you got all the Tipitaka there, the Pali text in relatively good translations.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of believe, that with the Goenka stuff, they'd always say you basically have to go off and do a 10-day retreat in order to really just even understand meditation. I could see how that would be true just because people's lives are so complicated with all this stuff. And if you don't go past that, like especially when it's just uncomfortable in the beginning because you have aches and pains, you're not used to sitting, maybe it's just boredom and agitation for a lot of the time. It can take that sort of environment or having a teacher, that kind of the aura of that teacher to really get you through it. Do you kind of see the same thing, or do you think you just can do it on your own through YouTube or whatever it might be?
Well, when I was doing it, there wasn't any YouTube yet. And yeah, it was like before I was a Buddhist meditator, could be that my main spiritual practice was just hiking out alone into a wilderness area and taking LSD. I mean, that was my spiritual practice, or a lot of it anyway. Maybe do like a little Hindu fire sacrifice or something while I'm out there, read some verses from the Rig Veda or something.
That's hilarious.
But, yeah.
Well, I kind of wanted, even with this, combining a little bit of the shaman stuff. I mean, going back to nature and spending time with the trees and doing some fire stuff and whatever. I mean, it seems to be pretty darn effective. It's a shame that it's kind of like, there's none of that really now in Buddhist stuff, because I think they were on the force so much, and then now it's just kind of like, I guess it wasn't considered that important, but I think it is.
Yeah, I tried to start something like that when I was in Bellingham, Washington. I was involved with a meditation group there, supposedly Theravada, ostensibly Theravada Buddhist group there. And I like the idea of just hiking out, maybe 8, 10, 12 miles out into a forest and just camp out there, and everybody has their own place and they meditate. And then in the evening, you all sit around the campfire and have the Dharma talk or the interviews or whatever. And I mean, that would be a nice way of going about it, I think. But everybody, they were all, lots of them were boomers who just had health issues, or else they just didn't want to rough it or that sort of thing. So it never really got anywhere. Or also, I had like one rule, which was no high-tech water filters. and it was like way up in the Cascade Mountains. I mean, the water was cleaner than what's coming out of your tap, but people are just freaking out about giardiasis or whatever. It's like I was getting all these admonishments how you really must change that rule. And it's like, that's the only rule practically, and I'm not changing it. If you have more faith in high-tech water filters than you have in Dharma, then you've got no business going out there. That's what I was saying. And it's like none of them just had any business going out there, because really they do. They were like, the average Western Buddhist is a materialist who really seriously has more faith in like scientific technology than in the idea that you protect Dharma, Dharma protects you. They just don't believe in karma. They don't believe in the power of your mind to influence whether you're going to do well or ill. It's just materialism. And that's it.
That's such a good point. And I agree 1,000%. Even like, it's funny because our teacher, he would, before when I was traveling with Ciro to Masara, all over, he would walk barefoot through Skid Row in LA, just glass, needles everywhere, and just being like, Dharma will protect. He never got anything, even with like the government, legal issues, like you name it. He just did what was right. And he was always protected, like nothing ever happened to him.
Yeah, it works that way.
It was amazing. And then Peace Pilgrim is like an amazing example of that. I can't, her state, to be able to do that as a 60-year-old woman, to just go out and just be like, I trust in God, I trust in Dhamma, whatever it is. It's just like, man, that is, you've already attained something. It's pretty high.
Yeah, faith is powerful, and love is powerful too.
And the other thing,
And for a materialist, it's just glandular secretions and hormones,
well, it's also
whatever.
with vaccines, man. I mean, I was our another Himalayan teacher, monk, that we follow. Um, he's really like, if you're spiritual, then I don't know what you're doing with a vaccine, because the idea is a lot of this stuff just perpetuates, like the back, whatever the energy that is, apparently is growing stronger, which just creates more super bugs or whatever, just kill more people down the line, is part of it.
Yeah,
Versus improving your immune system, improving your health, and the fact that everything we need to protect ourselves from nature, from viruses or whatever, it's already there within ourselves. We just got to, do our meditation practice, take care of our immune system, love. Love is pretty much, I think, the best thing. If you have a lot of love in your life, I think your immune system is just through the roof for the most part. Um, and that's Dhamma protecting, in my view.
yeah. Although for like the average Westerner, all of that is just brain circuitry and like hormones and stuff, and it's not as real as like this cup.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing I really like about you, is you also have like that mystic understanding too, both sides, because it's pretty rare, you know. Even the people
Yeah,
that
well, the mind is number one. It's like the first verse of the Dhammapada, which gets downplayed a lot because it got reinterpreted by the commentarial tradition. But
yeah,
I mean, the mind is really it's like our world is mind made.
and I also, want to, since we kind of got into the feminism patriarchy thing, I don't want to give men a break either. So I was hoping we can get into a little bit of that, as far as the current state of men and masculinity, maybe what that is, from a Buddhist perspective, especially.
Oh, masculinity. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely on the decline, isn't it?
What is it? Let's start there. What is it to you?
Masculinity. Well, I mean, it would get reinterpreted. I remember I used to communicate with a certain Dutch college girl who showed me a paper that she wrote for college. And I mean, she was just massively indoctrinated. And she was talking about like alternatives to masculinity, like new ways of masculinity. And every single option that she listed was just becoming more feminine, more sensitive and caring and gentle. And that's like the new masculinity. Whereas, that's not really masculinity. But I mean, I can understand how, I don't know, personally, I wouldn't mind if even like dueling and involuntary gladiatorial combat was re-legalized. I mean, that would be fine with me, so long as it was voluntary. It's like you're not just flinging slaves out there to the lions or anything like that. But
or maybe just like brawls, like just no weapons, right? Type of thing.
yeah, my father was like that. He was a bar brawler. He was the kind of guy, like, when he was a younger man. So this was a long time ago, ancient times practically. But he'd go out to a bar for three reasons. Just three. He'd already have these three reasons in his mind. He was going to get drunk. He's going to pick up a woman, and he was going to fight somebody. And that's just the way a lot of guys were, just sort of the alpha bar brawler. And they're like comparing their alphaness to the guy down the bar a little ways, who thinks he's the number one alpha. So it was voluntary. I mean, I don't think that should be illegal, but it's all toxic masculinity now. But still, I mean, it's like Buddhism. It's not violent. Obviously, it's it believes in ahimsa. So you don't prove your masculinity by beating people up or like killing enemies in battle or anything like that. But still, Theravada Buddhism originally was one of the most masculine spiritual systems there are, because it was so stoic. It was just fearlessness and just complete disdain for luxury or discomfort. And I mean, you had to be tough. The monks in the Buddhist time were tough as wood.
Yeah, I mean, not really being in your emotions, even though you should be able to observe them, but not, reacting to them, to me, in more those, like the monastic kind of, I guess, stoicism. Yeah, I mean, I think that is what masculinity looks like. And it seems that understanding of like even being deeply spiritual, because it does take you out of your emotions a lot. And
it's one of the most valuable things that I've learned as a monk too. It's just just detach from your emotions. Like you experience fear, Buddhism teaches you that, you know, you shouldn't be sitting there thinking I'm afraid. It's just fear is arising, and you're like, you're over here watching the fear, you know, it's like you're watching your hand, you know, it's not me, it's just this fear that I'm watching. And then it doesn't take you over, and, you know, then you're not reinforcing it, you're not feeding it. And then the next time it arises, it's a little weaker because you didn't feed it the last time. And gradually it fades out. It won't completely disappear probably because it's just hardwired into us. You know, there's like special areas in the brain and everything responsible for the different emotional reactions. And you got the hormones and everything, but still, I mean, you definitely can train yourself well enough that it doesn't just take you over.
Your camera just went out of focus a little bit. With the
Oh
hand,
yeah,
your
you're
hand
right.
up, your camera readjusted. I don't know if it's
Yeah, I don't know.
hopefully, but on that same note though, that's why I really like jiu-jitsu. You know, oh there we go. Now it's back.
Good.
With you know, fighting, I mean, you know, doing a physical martial art and knowing how to fight and being around other men, especially in that sort of like, you know, doing martial arts just allows a certain level of humility. You get your ass kicked, you kind of know where you are. Mentally, it allows you to go through a lot of pain, like kind of consciously, right? Because someone's hurting you and stuff hurts. My muscles hurt right now. I did like the noon class, and I also did 2 classes in a row yesterday, so my whole body's just pretty wrecked. But I mean, I
Yeah.
just love it. I just feel like you know, with making strong men, because, you know, especially even in the Christian side too, which is where a lot of these ideas I also kind of got from. In some ways, a lot of the problem is like that men are weak and that women kind of follow men. So if men become strong, the women will kind of fall in line. And you also actually see some of this in Bhagavad Gita, where Arjun is talking to Krishna, and he's talking about how, well, if I go into battle and all these men die, all of society is going to fall apart because there'll be no strong men because we killed each other, you know, so better, you know, not to do this. But then, you know, Krishna made the argument that it's basically better to fight for the truth, even if that means that, you know, there'll be consequences, because in the long run, if you fight for truth and what that stands for, that'll, you know, ripple through and, you know, allow for Dhamma or spirituality or, you know, whatever to come through. But I've been kind of playing with this idea more and more that, you know, it's not so much about even harping on feminism. Because also too, I used to think that feminists, like it was more of this, you know, and I mean, it's partly the indoctrination, but when I went over to Asia, there were so many women who didn't have a lot of the feminist ideas, but like act a lot of the same way. And I just realized a lot of it is just like women working in the workforce now, where they just need a set of something that kind of helps them empower, that can justify the fact they have to work. And psychologically, it's a lot easier to kind of believe in this feminist thing. Like I'm a powerful woman. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make money. I'll be happy this way, than to believe that you're supposed to have a family with all this stuff and how hard it is economically, and finding a man that they can feel like they can trust, who's strong. That's just so difficult that a lot of this feminist stuff, even if women say they don't believe in the, you know, ideas of feminism, a lot of times it doesn't matter because like there's so much acting in that way. And so, you know, the hard part though for me is like with masculinity is just that whole weaving in the provider thing, where it's like, you know, your masculinity is determined by how much money you make,
Yeah.
versus going back to like a simpler way where we can afford to live on very little. But, you know, then it's like, oh, I want the nice house, I want the nice school, I want the nice car. And it's like, okay, so I'm supposed to work myself to death for the rest of my life. So for what exactly?
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. Because I mean, I'm an ascetic. I mean, I'd be happy just living in a hut, I think, or a cabin, something like that. But generally, women don't appreciate that sort of thing nearly so much.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's the status thing. I feel like the status of like what is a good man has been so distorted because it's so closely tied with money, you know. And I understand women being attracted to power in the same way men are kind of attracted to beauty. I mean, there's some of that, but I do think that like a, you know, there's just as much of a fantasy, almost like the lumberjack in the forest who's just a freaking beast. You know what I mean? That's attractive to women, but
Yeah. Well, there's different kinds of strength or different kinds of power.
mhm. Yeah, and I do feel like if as I've kind of developed my own, you know, mental strength and physical strength or whatever, that's been able to kind of carry me. I mean, I'm also 6'7", so that helps, but you know, it's still, it's I always go back and forth with that. I mean, you know, I'm also, so with like relationship advice, aren't monks basically banned from giving relationship advice, or is like considered an offense, or is that?
No, I mean, the Buddha himself gave relationship advice in some famous sutta that I forget the name of. But what is against the rules is for a monk to act as a go-between, to like if a husband and wife are quarreling, he can reconcile them. But if they get divorced, he can't talk them into getting married again or getting back together. So yeah, there it is a little bit of it's kind of tricky. There's some nuance to it.
So if you do you well, I mean, just do you have any relationship advice then? I'm just curious even what you would say to someone.
It would depend on the relationship. It would depend on the person, I think. But I think one thing about women is they'll try to control a man, but if they succeed, they won't respect him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. And so I think we'll just maybe go to one more topic, and I feel like we should kind of finish with a bang. So I think we should just go to Trump.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're just gonna pretend race realism doesn't exist, because that's a red hot one there. we kind of touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, we can go a little bit back to that if you feel like there's a little bit more to cover before kind of going to this last topic. I mean, with the race thing.
Well, it's just essentially the races are different with physically and psychologically in subtle ways. I mean, all people are more alike than different, but still, for example, they've been doing IQ testing for over a century, and the results are pretty solid. They've come out pretty much the same for a century or several decades, many decades, with like the supposedly the most intelligent ethnicity on the planet is Ashkenazi Jews with an IQ of like 110, 112, something like that. Then after that is East Asians with about 105. Then after that is Europeans, who are the whole IQ testing system is calibrated so that Europeans come out at 100. And then you've got like the various brown-skinned ethnicities that are down around 90. And then below that, you've got, African Americans with like around 85, 86. And then below that, you've got like sub-Saharan Africans, pure-blooded, that are down around 70. And then below that, you've got like Australoids and like Kalahari Bushmen, who are like in the mid 60s, which would be technically like mentally retarded by Western standards. But you can't talk about that at all. That is so politically incorrect. We have just made this toxic for YouTube, and you may have to just edit this part out.
Well, I remember Jordan Peterson when he really got into like the real, how the IQ, like just taking the US, because I feel like the cultural comparing different places, because there's, different levels of education and all this sort of stuff. And, I mean, it's obviously still true, but it's like also kind of like, oh, okay, well, if the economy got better or whatever, maybe it's not like they're stupid per se, or really don't have the intellectual capacity, but that it takes time to cultivate this. And over time, with right nutrition and all this stuff, I mean, it can kind of balance out, because you have people from all these different races, say in the US. And I would think like, even like, what was it? The race with whatever the lowest IQ is, but if you took some of them and maybe they're over here in the US, it wouldn't be the same averages over there.
It's about the same. It's mostly the same. Like even if you've got one ethnicity adopted at infancy into a different ethnicity, it's going to stay around the average for its own ethnicity and not like mimic the score results of their adopted family ethnicity. So they've done all kinds of studies on that kind of thing too. And it's not saying that anybody's really inferior. It's just saying that different races have evolved for different environments. And so some races, they're just evolved for living a hunter-gatherer existence because they were hunter-gatherers up until modern times. Like, for example, any ethnicity that doesn't have like agricultural ancestry, they were like hunter-gatherers, like maybe some tribes of American Indians or like Australian Aborigines, for example. They're much more prone to diabetes simply because they haven't had 10,000 years of evolving to adjust to like a high carbohydrate agricultural diet. So there's all these differences, and we're just evolved to fit our the environment in which we evolved.
So, but what does that really like mean, even as far as like implications for society or how we should act?
Um, I mean, it shouldn't really have much influence at all. It's other than just you just have to accept the fact that there are going to be fewer black surgeons and engineers and more Jews at the top, and more, and like East Asians are going to make more money than white people do, even in the West, in a Western society, that sort of thing. And but still, I mean, everybody should be judged on their own character.
Yeah.
But the problem is that you have to generalize before you know somebody, which is one reason why, for example, the police are much less friendly with young black men, because just experience and statistics show that a young black man is much more likely to pull a gun on a cop than anybody else. So they're going to be more wary and less friendly. And it's not like racism so much as, I mean, they're putting their life on the line. And so they have to use stereotypes and just averages, statistical averages, as a way of gauging what they should do just to stay alive.
Well, it's funny to me because I remember hearing like the black cops are much worse even than the white cops. The other thing, because they also too, like, I don't know, the race thing isn't, I think everyone's afraid of being racist, especially now. And it seems like it's the same race. Like, I mean, that's what they do in jail, right? Every race takes care of their own race. If your guy's out of line, you talk to other white people or whatever, and they put you back in line, you know?
Yeah.
It's this weird thing, but I definitely don't want that for society. I think that's horrible. But I get it if you're like a lower spectrum of consciousness, which I think most people in prison, you know, kind of are, which is kind of why I got them there for the most part. It makes sense that, you know, if you start mixing all these races, there also just be a bunch of fighting and killing each other. You know, and you don't want that either.
Yeah.
And then also too, because, you know, it's funny, my mom was adopted, so I took a DNA test not too long ago. My brother did, but, you know, we're related. So, but we're mostly Ashkenazi Jews. And for a second there, I was kind of like, oh, going with the Jewish thing, even though I kind of realized a lot of this data stuff. I kind of really question now how accurate it is. I mean, even since the last time I looked at it, you know, all my German ancestry is gone. I think I like, before it was like 10, now it's 2. And then I got that 8% of French back, or not back, but I'm 8% French now, which, like we were talking about, I think in private, about my last name being French. So maybe it's just, you know, I don't know. I don't feel like putting weight in any of it. And I don't think it matters too much, but it always does kind of just make me think though about, you know, you wrote a couple of questions about the Jewish question, or a couple of articles about the Jewish question. So I'm just wondering, what's your position then on Jews? Obviously, Brian is big on the Jewish conspiracy and very much not, you know, even though he's friendly. I mean, you know, too, I remember him doing a podcast with a fascist Jewish guy, and he was, you know, they're all happy.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, there's like a difference between like Jewish people in general and like the Jews. And, you know, it's like if you read Culture of Critique, Kevin McDonald's Culture of Critique, you see that they're almost, well, I won't say all, or maybe I shouldn't even say almost all, but like some of the most important left pushing movements in America, like you know, like the gay rights, or the race rights, and like immigration, like non-European immigration. Like in 1965, there was like they changed the immigration rules so that way more non-Europeans can come into America, that sort of thing. It's almost all of it has been run by Jewish people, like the NAACP, you know, which is a black organization. It was founded like before World War I, I'm pretty sure, but it didn't have a non-Jewish president until like the 1970s. So it's like it's not, I mean, it's understandable that Jewish people really are trying to weaken like conservative Christian Western civilization, just to reduce anti-Semitism and reduce the possibility of, you know, massacres and pogroms and that sort of thing. You know, it's for their own self-interest. Plus, there's just you know, it's like a tribalism thing too. So they're like standing up for their own side.
I would
so,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, so they're just they have been involved in movements. Not all of them, obviously, but there have been a lot of high-profile ones. Running organizations or orchestrating movements that are essentially weakening conservative Western civilization and setting it up for something more Marxist or socialistic or something like that, or at least one in which Jewish people will prosper more.
My kind of my theory would be more that, you know, a lot of the Jews, especially the ones here, right? I mean, are pretty much non-religious for the most part, even though they might go here and there. But that basically, you know, what we have is a lot of people worshiping the intellect, and the intellect can make almost anything sound good. And so if that like moral compass is off, it's why I think a lot of the academics were the kind of the first ones to embrace a lot of the Marxist communist stuff, where they're all this data and they're kind of seeing causation and they can rationalize it so well that you know, it kind of makes sense that if you have this, you know, massive intellect and you can make things so complicated, all these factors, that you can just build this narrative that, you know, you can't see outside of. And this seems to be kind of the big problem with being a very intellectual, or even like intelligence, even from a Buddhist perspective, is not the greatest thing, because it should be more of this higher intuitive function. Even though that's not really a Buddhist phrasing, I don't know how else to phrase it, but you know, there is a transcending the mind, getting past the thinking mind. And a lot of this time of just developing this thinking mind all the time, it seems to me like if that thinking mind becomes super developed, it leads to a lot of problems, because it's not informed by this higher spiritual aspect. And that's why it's an issue. So if you have a great intellect and a great mind, but you know, you also do your spiritual practices, and then therefore that energy can come through, you can be connected to what reality, right? Because the thing is, like, even the word intellectual started off as like a insult, where it was basically someone who was you know, disconnected from their body and from reality. It's like you just live in your mind, you live in a dream world, you
Like an
know.
egghead.
And so that's what I kind of see happening there. It's just like, I think you know, it's just that. What do you think about
Well, intellectuals often, or especially leftist intellectuals, tend to prefer theories to like empirical reality. They
that?
just value the theory. They just like the elegant sounding theory, and they can fall in love with that. But as an explanation for like Ashkenazi Jews being uh, like instrumental in like the founding of Marxism, and even neoconservatism was begun by disenchanted Trotskyites, that or Trotskyite Jews, I should say,
Mm.
although it's almost the same thing.
Mm.
So yeah, I assume there is some just also, there's just in Western civilization, there has just been this chronic friction going back to ancient times between Jews and Gentiles. There's been this like an antagonism or animosity. It's been like a symbiosis that wasn't always like a mutualistic symbiosis. And so there is like mutual resentment going, like just going both ways. And there is some of that. There's like the Jews consider themselves to be like a chosen people. They're separate from the rest of the world. And so it's just like this separation that doesn't go away, and it's just been there, and that in itself is going to cause a certain amount of friction, just like male and female. Like Julius Evola considered, you know, Jew and Gentile just be ingrained into Western civilization now. It's just like this chronic um like inflammatory interaction that's going on.
Yeah, I guess out of all the Jewish people I've, you know, talked to before, I just never felt like there was any grand conspiracy. I feel like
Yeah.
pretty much nature and this the intellectual thing, and then with academia and stuff, seems to pretty much explain everything. You know, like any time where it's like, oh well, there's a bunch of Jews that are trying to protect themselves because they don't want to be persecuted. I just, from all the Jewish people that I've talked to, I've never seen or felt that from them.
Yeah, most of the Jews that I have known have been practicing Buddhists. You know, they had Jewish ancestry, but they didn't make a big deal of it at all. I've met very few that really can still consider themselves to be like Jewish.
Hmm.
You know, they just you know, you'd know somebody for years, and then one day you just it just comes up in conversation that their father was Jewish or something, and you know, you just never would have known. So yeah, most Jewish people are like you say, but still there are a certain group of them, or it's not even like a coherent group, but there is a significant minority, especially up towards the top of society, that you know, you got like the Soros and the Rothschilds, and
Hmm.
even Karl Marx, you know, and like most of the Bolsheviks, like the high-ranking Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union, were Jews.
Mm.
And even though they're not religious, still there's like the tribalistic sentiment involved. And it doesn't take very many of them, because they're intelligent people and they rise to the top. And so just a few George Soroses can wreak a lot of havoc.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think with, like having, because it's like a power in a sense, intellect. So it's like, the more power you have, you can use it for good or evil.
Yeah.
And, I think the world as a whole has definitely not been at a high level of consciousness. And so it makes sense that the majority of people, that maybe have a lot of this power or abuse it. But definitely, how would you say, as a group, I think the solution is definitely to move. I mean, this is why my idea of even America was like to move past race, that it could be like a melting pot.
Yeah, that's the ideal. And it was getting that way, like back like the 1980s, if I recall. America was becoming more and more colorblind, where it was just like Martin Luther King was saying, you're judged not by the color of your skin, but by the quality of your character.
Yeah.
And now they're moving back away from it. It's like, especially the left, they're more race obsessed than the right is. Even though they're calling the right racists, it's the left that will see a person and judge them by the color of their skin more than the right will.
Yeah.
So at least that's my impression. That seems to be what I've been observing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that for sure, and it's really tough because it's like, I mean, and I mean they call it like in Christianity like the Luciferic influence, where it's like down is up and up is down. It's like everything is reversed. It's like they're fighting racism, but it's flaming racism. It's doing the exact opposite, and it's so obvious to me that it's just, it's like, God, it's unbelievable that this can be happening. Same with like the income inequality. It's like we want to fight income, make things more balanced and more even. And all it's doing is making it more imbalanced. The US is more in debt and it's making things more lopsided. It's just like, God, this is so weird.
Yeah, it's essentially insane as far as I can tell. It's just astonishing to me that so many people believe it. But then again, people can believe anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we're a social animal, and it's like it's just built into most people to just follow along with what they're told.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to justify. I mean, I really started questioning, like, to get in touch with the reality. I really think, you purifying the mind, letting go of thoughts, being able to see them. It's hard for me sometimes too, because you see apparently a lot of these, more leftists, especially within the Buddhist community, meditating and doing this and that, and I just wonder, it's like, are they like, or is it just, even if you meditate, but you're being, told certain things that are counter to Buddhism or Dhamma? Maybe it doesn't even matter if you meditate, because that stuff just gets like, you believe it and it's just subtler, and it's like, okay, well, they just consider it true because they're, false teachers, I guess. I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, look at Christianity. Is like almost everybody in the West, including really intellectual people like Isaac Newton, they just took it for granted that, all the suffering in the world is caused by the man made from soil and the woman made from the bone being tricked by a snake into eating a certain kind of fruit. And people just believe that without question for over 1,000 years.
do you think so? You think it wasn't like symbolic? I mean, I know there was some stuff. I mean, even with like, explaining like, the world being flat or this type of thing. I mean, but sometimes I wonder, like, especially people that has in the past, and this is kind of like even like Jordan Peterson's point with archetypes and all this stuff, that, it mostly functions through some form of deeper truth, something esoteric. I don't know if all of it, like, even, I mean, I've read, explanations, about the tree of knowledge, and because of that knowledge in the mind that awakens certain things. And there's like all these other kind of like explanations besides the most superficial one. And I kind of just feel like, I don't know, at least from my point of view, that works. But
well, yeah, even forget Adam and Eve then. I mean, just the very idea that a Jewish carpenter turned miracle rabbi is the creator of the universe is pretty far-fetched to a non-Christian.
unless, I mean, I get the same thing with like kind of Buddha, in a sense, where it's like have someone fully enlightened and all the supernatural powers and this and that. I mean, I don't know. Is it any more far-fetched than that? Because if it's not about race, right, it would just be a body fundamentally, especially if you're liberated. It's like one meat sack over another.
Yeah, although even Gautama Buddha, even though he was definitely glorified, he wasn't the only the only possible Buddha, the only begotten son of God. He wasn't deified, really. Although the Mahayana Buddhists, I suppose, deified him, but
Well, you had the Gnosticism, you know, the Gnostic stuff, which I think is kind of closer to the truth from a Christian perspective. Even though when I studied Eastern Orthodox stuff, it seemed like God was a mystery. Like when you threw out in these couple other factors that made things fuzzy, I was kind of like, oh, okay, this can kind of work.
yeah, if you make it fuzzy, that's, you know, like the Trinity. I've read that one reason why the Trinity is such a big deal in Christianity, especially in Greek Orthodox, is because it's just incomprehensible. It just emphasizes that it's just an incomprehensible mystery.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of like.
God is one and three at the same time.
Yeah, and it's basically just emphasized like a lot of humility, which I really like. A lot of the Eastern Orthodox monks that I met, I was really impressed with. I mean, just with their demeanor, and they were very humble, and you know, just say what's bothering you and stuff. Also, too, I mean, they had that patriarchal stuff, you know, where it's like they're the head and they're bleeding and stuff, and I don't know, it was kind of cool to see that because I went to the Eastern Orthodox Church in when I was in Korea, funny enough, which was all like Russians. They were living in Korea because my best friend over there was Christian, and so he wanted to go somewhere. So I said, "Oh, let's check this out." So that was my experience. Have you ever read Jesus Christ, the Eternal Tao?
No.
I would check it out actually. I don't think his thing is accurate as far as thinking that the Tao is talking about Jesus, which is basically the claim that he makes. But it does kind of do a pretty good job of connecting the Eastern philosophical principles with Christianity in a way that's like makes it really kind of fun. I don't know, interesting. Anyway, I recommend checking it out. But
yeah, well, the more advanced the Dharma is, or the teaching, then they're gonna converge. You know, the higher up you get, the more similar they're going to be, as a general rule.
Yeah, I mean, if you stick to that and kind of the Desert Fathers, like with a little bit of Gnosticism, you know, that mystery, and then you have the Desert Fathers, or like whatever monastic side Christian had in the early days, where it basically is just like all about meditating more or less. And
yeah, St. John of the Cross, definitely.
yeah, and I mean, I feel like you're good if you focus on that from a Christian perspective, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, I debated a number of times where I'm just like, you know, maybe I should just go to Christianity because, you know, I could be kind of happy with that and I can blend into society and not have all these problems with, you know, the Buddhist and the Hindu stuff. But I think at the end of the day, it's, I still think the Buddhist Hindu stuff is more true and accurate. So I have to go with it. But
yeah, Christianity has certain handicaps, you know, like the individual soul that doesn't ever merge with God, but it's always going to be separate from God, so that the highest you can possibly even hope for is the beatific vision, where you get to go up and be near God in heaven, and then that lasts forever and everything. So yeah, Christianity definitely has like handicaps, has dogmas that are like a handicap, but nevertheless there have been people like St. John of the Cross who, despite the handicaps, were able to use Christianity as a vehicle towards very advanced meditative and mental and spiritual states.
yeah, the deal breaker kind of for me was the Bible and some of those older stories, especially in the Old Testament. I was just kind of like, oh, really, guys? Come on. Like, I mean, Jordan Peterson did a good job, though, of kind of convincing me of, you know, some of that stuff maybe having more merit than I definitely thought prior, but still can't really vibe with it too much. Some of them are good, but some of them are just really like, you know, off in my view. And it's a lot of backflip.
I have considered that I might be willing to just take the hit, take one for the team, for this, allow Christianity to reestablish itself as the predominant like worldview for the West, just to strengthen the West again, because the West is disintegrating at present, because there really is no unifying belief system, and any prosperous, strong, healthy, vital civilization has to have a unifying belief system where everybody has similar values, or almost everybody has, you know, essentially the same kind of values and the same idea of our place in the universe, and our purpose for being on the planet and all this kind of thing. And it's all just falling apart now, or like the only viable alternative that is offered really is the cultural Marxism stuff, which is just freaking insane.
Well, that's why, you know, conservatism, my friend. I mean, basically that is what differentiates conservatism, in my view, from the straight liberal, is it believing that there should be some sort of set of principles that are understood and disseminated among the population and schools and all this stuff. So
Yeah.
get on the same page.
Yeah, it used to be like the American ideals of set up by the founding fathers of,
Yeah.
liberty and, pursuit of happiness and that sort of thing. And, you have to govern yourself. If you don't want to be governed by a government, you got to govern yourself, that sort of thing. So it was like Enlightenment ideals kind of took the place of Christianity as the central worldview of the founding fathers, I think.
And so then, just kind of like for the last thing, then I guess going back to Trump, I feel like the other stuff now is just as controversial. So I don't know if it's really ending with a bang anymore, but just kind of I'm just curious about your own views on all that now, because I noticed you had a number of articles about him and maybe certain movements around him, and I just kind of wanted to see what you had to say about that now.
I think he may be the best president of my lifetime. Even though, I mean, that's one reason why the left hated him so hysterically. It's like the really great people tend to be just hated the most violently. And so, I mean, the only Republican president hated more vehemently than Donald Trump was Abraham Lincoln. He was hated so bad that it caused Democrat states to just secede from the Union as soon as he won the election. It was before he even took office. So, yeah, I think he was a good president, but he was sort of like George Patton, where he was politically incorrect and didn't really fit in. And yeah, he rubbed some people the wrong way. And also he was just an outsider to the establishment and just tried to actually get things done. And like the mass of the political caste are mediocrities, and they resent anybody who's actually getting things done because they want to keep the problems going, because that's what they get elected is for solving the problems, and then they just never solve them so that they'll get elected next time to solve the problems.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see if he'll end up actually pulling off starting his own social media platform, because the social media and just media in general is the scariest thing to me, because I think that it seems like there's not a majority of the population that's awake enough to be able to see the media for what it is, which is a propaganda machine at this point. And, I kind of wonder, like, maybe it's just going to be, there's not enough strong men to stand up and the media controls everything, and it's kind of already over in a very subtle way. I think like sometimes I kind of feel like that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's always been that way, though. People can say, "Oh, just look at how big tech is taking over, and everybody's just like their slave now." But I mean, it's always been that way. Before, like late Roman Empire, it was essentially Christianity that was filling the same niche, and it wasn't the internet. It was just everyone's going to church, and you got the anti-Roman preacher just firing away at Antichrist who's in Rome and all this kind of stuff, and had people hating their own country and all that too. So it's happened before, and it's probably always happened where people are always been, most of the people have always been sheep-like and just believing what they're told, and so the story changes. But and one of the great values of Donald Trump is he just had the cockroaches come out in broad daylight. They made themselves so obvious that for a lot of people, you just can't unsee it now. It's just so obvious that the mainstream media is now, just like you said, just a big propaganda machine. They don't even care about the truth anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it definitely is worse than ever, but I feel like always things have to become more polarized in order for people to kind of see eventually what's going on, and then hopefully the side of good wins, but it's not a given. You look all over the world. I mean, it's definitely,
Yeah, well, it's the cycle of history. Strong men make good times make weak men make bad times, and bad times make strong men. So we're in the weak men making bad times phase.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever get into martial arts and other stuff too? Do you kind of, I mean, I wondered like how to instill that sort of, strong men things. I think there is a way in which to develop that consciously.
I was never really into athletics. Mostly I was like doing a lot of backpacking, just hiking alone in the mountains, that kind of thing. And yeah, that was my my macho asceticism.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for coming on, and I appreciate these talks. I mean, one of the few people that I feel like we can have these conversations and, really support kind of a united cause, because it's just so many distractions, so much anger and resentment and all these people. And it's just like, trying to figure out all this stuff, has been really difficult, both in just, how to have loving relationships, how to practice correctly, what's important, when should I stand up, when should I not? And, kind of reading your stuff and, like these conversations helps really clear up stuff for me. So thank you very much, Venerable.
Yeah, you're welcome. And the world has always been messed up. I mean, the first noble truth is always true. So yeah, it's not really wise to think that the good old days where it was like there was the golden age and everything was great, but because everything has never been great.
Oh, that reminds me, actually, just I guess with the Aryans, I did want to ask you about that. I'm just remembering now, since you talked about the golden age. Do you believe that the Aryans were kind of a people that still go, and that there's, I think even now, right, with the whole, I mean, most people, when they think Aryans, they think of Hitler, but really it was supposed to be kind of like the last peak age. And I was just kind of curious to get your 2 cents about just Aryans in general.
The Aryans are the Indo-Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that's what you're referring to as like the Indo-European ethnicity.
Yeah, I just can't pronounce anything correctly, so yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think there was really like an Aryan golden age even.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they were just really successful. You had this group of people north of the Black Sea somewhere, probably, a few thousand years ago, who they were big and strong and aggressive, and they liked war, and they were some of the first people to tame and ride horses, and they were some of the first people to use iron. But this is before they started using iron, and they had like a powerful language. And so because of that, they just dominated, and they just spread out in all directions and pretty much conquered all of the West. There are very few languages in the West that aren't Indo-European languages now. So it was more of a very strong, vibrant, vital, successful culture and ethnicity that just spread out in all directions because they were so successful that they outcompeted or just conquered everyone around them pretty much. So I don't think that would necessarily indicate a golden age. And then of course they were interbreeding, wherever they went, they'd be picking the prettiest girls to marry, and honoring some of the aristocrats of the older culture, by making them honorary Aryans or whatever. Or sort of like in India they did that, where like a lot of the native chieftains who got absorbed into the Vedic culture would just be made like, they'd be accepted as kshatriyas, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's all blended out. There is no pure Aryan blood anymore, I'm pretty sure.
Well, even from my understanding, there was just like this group of that. How would you say it? I mean, I would want to say it's a soul group, but I don't know what you would call it, because, but a group of beings that, from lifetime that are more evolved and come in, and that these kind of make up what's, they call Aryan. But I think, I think there's definitely people at all different levels. And I think that, if you are a higher being, it makes sense to me that you would have more lives, or if it worked harder, and that you would find like some sort of collective unity among your interactions. Like I, want to interact with more people that would be on my level, and that there's something like that. Or I don't know if that's just completely, I know it's a little bit blasphemy from a Buddhist perspective, but I was just curious.
Yeah, it is possible that you're going to have certain eras of the human race where the situation is just optimal for people with good karma to be born there. You've just got like this strong, like a spiritually oriented civilization, sort of like India in the Buddhist time, like the Ganges Valley during the Buddhist time. It was almost a miracle. I mean, there were still lots of wars and like bandits and that kind of thing, but still, I used to consider, and maybe I still consider, that may have been like the high point of human civilization, was way back then. And so there may be just times and places where the situation is optimal for more advanced people to take rebirth there or something. But then there's another reason why the Aryan race was so popular or so successful. I read this in the book, is that they were one of the first groups of people that was lactose tolerant. So there was that too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you can you have more calories per acre of land from dairy cows than from beef cows, and so you could have a higher population density, which meant you could have a bigger army than the tribe next door, that kind of thing.
Interesting. Well, that's about all the politically incorrect stuff I can think of off the top of my head. So I think we're doing pretty good. Thank you once again for coming on. And
Yeah, you're welcome.
see you again soon.
Inshallah.